Hey guys, tonight we sail under a canopy of shimmering pinpoints, imagining yourself on a wooden waka as the warm salt breeze carries you across endless dark waters. You can feel the faint hum of community songs blending with the rhythmic slap of waves. You pause, glance skyward, and realize the same stars that guide your way have guided countless ancestors before you. You're about to step into a world where constellations are more than distant lights, they're signposts to the underworld. You might think you're here just to relax, but let's be honest, you're also here to learn something new before nodding off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing who's tuning in from all corners of the world. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey through history together. You drift onto the deck, settling against the polished rail, and notice the Milky Way's haze stretching above, like spilled pearls across black velvet. The Māori of Aotearoa, New Zealand, mastered this sky long before telescopes or GPS existed, using it as both compass and classroom. Around 1300 AD, Polynesian settlers, your ancestors, navigated over 2,000 miles of open ocean from Hawaii, an ancestral homeland, using only stars, waves, birds, and an intimate knowledge of wind patterns as guides. That voyage stands as one of the greatest feats of navigational skill in human history. As you breathe in the salty air, you pick out Matariki, the Pleiades cluster, rising in the northeast. In Māori tradition, its heliacal rising marks the new year. Observing Matariki's dawn appearance around June or July signaled planting time and communal gatherings, practical and poetic. But here's a fringe tidbit: some oral stories claim that if you whispered your secret wishes to Matariki, the stars themselves would carry them to ancestors in the underworld. No one can confirm if stars really chat back, but it's a charming idea that makes you wonder whether your own whispered hopes could drift across the cosmos. You lean back, and the waka seems to glide silently, guided by steady hands that never waver. Historians still argue about precisely how Māori honed their navigational prowess without written records, but they certainly left physical evidence: carved star compass designs on wooden boards, known as tormi. Scholars are intrigued by these simple yet precise star charts, some built around 300 BCE in other Polynesian contexts. It's wild to think these etched guides survived centuries of storms and sea voyages, passed between Tahunga, priests navigators, as secret treasure maps of the heavens. Your gaze drifts to Orion's belt, an Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka trio that shines with crystalline brilliance. To Māori, this set of bright stars was more than an astronomical marvel. It signaled proximity to Tawiri Maitea, the god of storms. Spotting Orion too low on the horizon meant rough weather ahead, too high, and you risked missing the critical alignment for your next bearing. The way those three stars align also corresponded with seasonal shifts in sea swell patterns. You nod to yourself: who knew that starlight could forecast waves? Night sounds fill your ears: distant calls of teak, saddleback, and the soft lapping of waves against the hull. Each sound feels amplified in the cool night air. You inhale deeply, tasting salt and feeling the wooden grain beneath your fingers, rough yet worn smooth by countless hands. Everything here feels alive. History isn't just something in dusty books, it's wrapped around you like a warm cloak. You might be tempted to picture this as an unbroken tradition, but life changes. In the 19th century, as European settlers arrived, missionaries discouraged Māori from using traditional navigation methods, branding them heathen. Many celestial teachings were hidden or repurposed to avoid suppression. Yet some elders quietly carried star maps in their memories and even concealed them within carvings on marae emitting houses. Today, a growing movement in Aotearoa is reclaiming these arts, blending centuries-old lore with modern stargazing tools. You press your hand to a wooden carving beside you, a stylized representation of Matariki with 7 stars, each uniquely chiseled to reflect brightness. That carving might date back to the early 1800s, though pinpointing its creator is tricky. Some say it belonged to a Tahunga, priest navigator, who sailed across Te Moana Nui Kiwa, the Pacific Ocean, to exchange bird names and star lore with distant island communities. Others whisper that he vanished mysteriously one night. swallowed by a sudden fog at sea, leaving behind only that intricate carving and a riddle about the sky's hidden pathways. The deck beneath you creaks as the waka shifts gently. You feel the slight sway and imagine the craft carving through dark waters, each star overhead acting like a lighthouse beacon. In this moment, you're not just an observer, you're participating in a living tapestry, woven by generations of navigators who read the night sky like a book. Your heartbeat slows as you sense the immense responsibility they bore, guiding loved ones safely across unknown seas. You feel a drift towards sleep, but your mind stays alive, savoring each detail. The scent of oil from the waka's wooden planks mixes with the faint aroma of roasted kumara stored below deck. Islanders once stockpiled cured fish and root vegetables in watertight baskets, anticipating voyages that could last weeks. That practical provision of food meant the difference between survival and tragedy. Remember, you're floating above a world where knowledge kept families alive, where each star had purpose, and each drift of breeze carried whispers of lore. As you stare at the heavens, you realize the sky's language is more visceral than words, a direct transmission from ancestors who loved, laughed, and feared under the same stars. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you sense the boundary between past and present dissolving. Stars that guided canoes now guide your dreams. So, float here a moment longer, letting the cosmos whisper its secrets as you drift toward slumber. Just as navigators have done for centuries. The stars shift as your gaze lingers overhead. Their slow dance across the sky is so smooth, you barely notice how the heavens change, until suddenly, they do. You're watching the same celestial clock that the Māori once trusted with their lives. Unlike them, you start to recognize more than just pretty patterns up there. Each dot has a name, a direction, a duty. Welcome to your celestial compass. You tilt your head slightly, noting how the sky is divided, not just randomly scattered with twinkles. Māori navigators, known as Tahunga Tai Ararangi, read these skies like maps, with major stars acting as points on a giant cosmic wheel. They divided the horizon into specific segments marked by rising and setting stars. You can picture it like this: if the ocean was a canvas, the stars painted the paths across it. Want to head east? Follow the stars that rise over that ridge. Need to turn north? Wait for the right cluster to hit its mark on the horizon, and right now, your eyes find Rahua, the blazing red heart of the summer skies, known globally as Antares. In Māori belief, Rahua wasn't just a navigational marker, it was a divine figure, a bringer of healing and food. Its appearance told Māori when birds were fat for hunting and the forest was ready to give. But to a navigator, its angle on the horizon said, time to adjust course. That's how closely survival was tied to the rhythm of stars. Now here's a fun one, the star Puanga, that's Rigel to the rest of the world. In some iwi, tribal, traditions, Puanga was even more important than Matariki when it came to marking the Māori New Year. Why? Because in certain southern parts of Aotearoa, Matariki is harder to see. So Puanga gets the promotion. Bit of a regional rivalry going on in the sky, north prefers Matariki, south swears by Puanga. You can almost hear the debates on ancient beaches. No, our stars are the real ones. Classic. Your waka dips slightly in the swell, and you catch the sharp tang of seaweed clinging to the hull. The air is cooler now, and the stars appear crisper, clearer, perfect for navigation. That's no accident. Māori deliberately traveled at night when stars were visible and wind patterns were gentler. During the day, they rested, replenished, and sometimes just drifted. Smart, right? Kind of the opposite of your daily commute, you trace the Milky Way as it sprawls overhead, known in Māori as Te Ikaroa, the long fish. It's more than a pretty sight, it's the backbone of the night sky and an actual navigational highway. When you align your waka with Te Ikaroa, you know you're slicing right through the heart of the sea path. It's the celestial center line. If you ever thought you were bad with directions, imagine steering your family across thousands of miles based only on how a fish-shaped dust trail glows after midnight. No pressure, historians are still puzzled by just how precise this celestial system was. Without sextants or compasses, Māori navigators could calculate latitude with remarkable accuracy. Theories range from counting star risings to tracking the angle between known stars and the horizon using knotted cords or even just the width of a hand held at arm's length. That's right, you're looking at your own thumb like it's a high-tech tool. And back then? It absolutely was. Let's slide in a quirk. Some stories say that on calm nights, Tahunga would float small bowls of water in the waka and watch for the reflection of specific stars. The angle and placement of the reflections told them if the waka was drifting off course. It's like a celestial review mirror, except the mirror is a puddle and the GPS is the literal galaxy. You almost want to try it next time you're in a bathtub. You blink slowly and imagine a young apprentice navigator, maybe 14, maybe younger, shadowing the elders at sea. Notebooks weren't a thing. Everything was memorized through chants and stories. You'd learn your Wakapapa genealogy right alongside the constellations. And if you messed up? Well, let's just say a miscalculation didn't mean a bad grade, it meant getting lost in the middle of the Pacific. No retakes. But also? No homework, the rhythm of the waves becomes hypnotic. You imagine lying in the bottom of the waka, arms crossed behind your head, listening as the elders murmur stories of Ranginui, the Sky Father, and Papatnuku, the Earth Mother, separated at the dawn of time. Their children pushed them apart to let light into the world. That same light now forms the constellations. Every bright point overhead is part of a divine drama, and by knowing their places and their stories, you learn how to live, how to move, how to return home. Suddenly, a star blinks on the horizon, just barely visible. It's Torturu, Orion's belt. You remember from earlier how it marks a critical celestial transition. If it appears in the wrong part of the sky, it warns of storms or poor omens. But now? Now it's exactly where it should be. You feel a quiet kind of satisfaction. Like clicking into the next track of a perfectly curated playlist. Everything's in alignment, you glance down at the water and catch a curious shimmer. The surface reflects starlight in streaks of silver and gold, almost like the sea is repeating the sky's message. You understand why Māori believed that the ocean and the heavens were twins, mirroring each other, revealing secrets if you just knew how to look. And it's that skill, looking, really seeing, that kept generations safe. You might not sail a waka anytime soon, but tonight, you get it. The stars weren't decorations or distractions. They were teachers, protectors, and sometimes even gatekeepers. They guided you not only across seas, but through life itself. Your eyes flutter a little, and you feel your breath slowing. If you close them, the stars will still be there, carrying on their patient cycles. Just like they did for the ancestors. Just like they always will. The sea hushes beneath your vessel, a mirror to the night sky above. There's a new intensity to the stars now, sharper, more focused, as if they know what comes next. You find yourself gazing again at Torturu, Orion's belt, but now through a different lens. These three stars, so cleanly aligned, don't just mark direction. For the Māori, they signal a passage. Not across oceans, but across realms. There's a story whispered by fireside and chanted in mourning. A tale that places Torturu not in the sky but at the gateway between the world of the living and TEP, the vast and misty underworld. To Māori, death isn't an end. It's a voyage, and the soul's departure isn't random. It follows a path, sometimes literal. Sometimes poetic, guided by the stars. Now imagine you've lost someone. A Tahunga lifts their hand skyward as Torturu appears on the eastern horizon, just before dawn. That moment, delicate as breath on cold air, is the time when spirits begin their journey. They're drawn to the rising of Torturu like a tide drawn by the moon. That star belt becomes their bridge, their tether to a place beyond your reach. In some iwi traditions, that path leads northward to Te Rerenga Wairua, the spirit's leaping place at the tip of New Zealand's North Island. Stand there, even today, and you can feel it. cliffs that fall away to crashing surf. A twisted futukawa tree clinging to the rock, gnarled with age, said to cradle the spirits as they leap from the world of light to the darkness of Hainu-etp, the goddess of death. From that point, it said, souls follow the underwater path to the underworld. And above them? Still, always, Torturu, you rub your arms, chilled not by temperature, but by story. It's that good kind of eerie, the kind that makes you feel connected to something far older than the names of continents. Torturu wasn't just a celestial signpost, it was spiritual infrastructure. A literal wayfinding tool for the afterlife. Here's the quirky part. Some Māori stories suggest that during certain alignments of the belt, when all three stars stand on end, as they put it, strange things happen. Birds fly in odd patterns. Dogs bark at nothing. People wake in the middle of the night, swearing they heard voices whispering their name. Were these dreams tricks of the wind? Or something more? You don't need to decide. Just consider it. The waka slides on, silent but alert. You glance around. No one else aboard, but you feel presence. Not frightening. Just quiet company. Maybe spirits hitch rides when the stars line up. Maybe you're never truly alone under a sky like this. You breathe deep, grounding yourself in the now. Even as your mind tiptoes into myth. Torturu was also used in another way, by the living this time. It marked when certain foods were ready to harvest, when eel migrations would surge, and when the weather would shift. This belt, sharp and steady, was part of a seasonal calendar that rivaled any modern app. Remember that water bowl trick from last time? Some Tahunga would track the reflection of Torturu in the water. If the stars wavered, the waka's path was off. If they stood still and straight, all was well. But if one star vanished, usually a trick of cloud cover, it was considered a warning. Stay put. Wait for clarity. Historians still puzzle over how widespread this death path belief was. Did all Iwi see Torturu as the gateway? Or just some? Oral traditions aren't always tidy, and there's overlap with stars like Puanga and Ruhwa in other regional cosmologies. But that's the beauty of it. Truth, for the Māori, is often layered. Myth blends with practice. Belief blends with observation. It's not always about was it real? But did it guide us? And it did. You remember the feeling of standing under a dark sky during a blackout. The quiet hum. The sense of exposure and intimacy. That's what the Māori night sky practice invites, connection. No barrier between human and cosmos. Just the raw sky, the steady stars, and the stories that link you together. Back aboard your imaginary waka, you stare at the belt again and feel yourself settle. You feel time stretch, elastic. There's no rush out here. And anyway, where would you go that's more profound than this? You're floating beneath the exact stars that mark the edge between what's known and what's not. In a whispered chant you can almost hear, there's a lullaby for souls, hair ra with Macron, ete wairua. Follow the belt, beyond the land, beyond the light, you lean into it, eyes half closed, and let that image form. A silver ribbon of starlight stretching from horizon to horizon. Silent figures, spirits, drifting upward along the beam, one by one. Not in fear, not in haste. Just returning, and you? You're safe here. No need to rush. You're not crossing yet. You're just witnessing. Remembering. Learning. Stars flicker. Wind shifts. The waka rocks gently. The belt of Orion holds its place, unbothered by your questions or your awe. It simply is. The stars haven't moved, not really, but the sky feels different now. It's wider. Deeper. You're starting to see what the Tahunga saw. Not just points of light, but patterns of movement, sequences of significance. It's like the stars have opened a second layer, a quiet one, that only the patient or sleepless can hear. Above your drifting waka, the shimmering band of Te Ikaroa, the Milky Way, arcs across the heavens. And now, as you gaze at it again, you notice it doesn't sit still. It tilts, rotates, shifts slightly through the night, like a giant bowl slowly pouring cosmic water into the sea. This tilt matters a lot, because Māori navigators didn't just use fixed positions, they tracked movement. They memorized how the stars traveled, not just where they appeared. You feel your mind turning over this slowly. Imagine you're heading toward an island over the horizon. You can't see land yet, but you know that when Te Ikaroa shifts to that 15-degree tilt and Matariki brushes the horizon at a certain angle, you're close. Not guessing, knowing. That's the power of a celestial rhythm. Let's dig into Matariki for a second. You've probably heard it's a cluster, globally known as the Pleiades, but in Aotearoa, it's so much more than a bunch of stars. Matariki means eyes of God or tiny eyes, depending on the dialect, and it signals the Māori New Year. Its heliacal rising, when it appears just before dawn for the first time in winter, is like an alarm clock for planting, remembering the dead and setting intentions. You watch for it. You celebrate it. You sing to it. And you use it to travel. Because when Matariki rises in a certain position just before dawn, it's a celestial green light. That's when the sea is calmest. That's when navigation resumes. Not just for the living, but for memory itself. The rising of Matariki is when families recall those who passed during the previous year. Names are spoken aloud. Stories are retold. The sky becomes a family album, one that stretches across centuries. You lean back and watch as the constellation slowly lifts above an imagined eastern horizon. It looks like a nest of light, close and glowing, a reminder that even in winter's coldest nights, something new begins. It's comforting in a way that's hard to explain. Like seeing a porch light in the distance when you thought you were lost. Now, the nerdy bit, you'd think ancient people wouldn't know the heliacal rising of a constellation down to the day. But they did. Māori Tahunga could pinpoint it based on shifts in humidity, sea haze, and animal behavior. Some even noted that certain eels would migrate right before Matariki's return. That's how tightly woven everything was. Stars, fish, seasons, planting, spirits, it was all one braid, and then comes the oddball fringe detail. You ready? Some Tahunga believed you could read Matariki's mood by studying its brightness. If the star shone clear and strong, the year ahead would be full of food and calm seas. If they blinked or seemed hazy, trouble. A lean harvest. Maybe a loss. Think of it like a glittering weather report in 7 dots. This was no casual stargazing either. Entire communities gathered in the pre-dawn frost just to spot those little lights. Blankets wrapped tight, breath visible in the air, Tahunga chanting softly, all eyes turned east. You picture it now, an entire village staring skyward in silence, waiting for a spark. A celestial whisper promising that yes, the cycle turns again. And it wasn't just Matariki. Māori astronomers had dozens, sometimes hundreds, of star names, each assigned to a job. Some guided fishing. Some guarded timing for warfare. Some watched over childbirth, or healing, or seasonal shifts. You weren't just naming stars. You were assigning them roles in the play of life. You might even have your own guardian star, chosen at birth. A kind of celestial sponsor. Every time it returned to its prime place in the sky, it was like a personal check-in. Still here. Still shining. You good? Let's bring it home with something a little strange. There are whispers in a few oral traditions of stars that have disappeared. Not just because of cloud or season, but truly vanished. Elders speak of lights they once followed that never rose again. Were these just misremembered positions? Or could there be something weirder? Lost comets, faded novas, stories absorbed by the sky? Who knows? But you're lying here under the stars now, and you kind of hope they're still out there. Watching, you shift slightly. The waka creaks gently. The sky stretches wider still, and the stars continue their slow slide toward morning. It's almost like a tide, but one of light. You don't need a map anymore. Not tonight. You just follow the rhythm. You remember Torturu, your sky anchor. You remember Matariki, your seasonal signal. You remember the sea beneath you, always moving but always telling the truth. If you just listen, out here, time doesn't feel linear. It folds like fabric. It ripples like starlight on water. And history? It's not behind you. It's above you. Still moving, still shimmering, still waiting to guide the next journey. The sky has thinned just a little. Not quite dawn, not quite night. That liminal moment where everything seems softer. The stars haven't gone, but they're fading, like someone turning down the volume on a cosmic radio. You're still drifting. Still watching. And now, your focus shifts, not to the stars themselves, but to the people who remembered them. Think about this, the incredible feat of memory it took to keep all this celestial knowledge alive, generation after generation. No paper. No star maps. No planetarium domes with laser pointers. Just stories, chants, repetition, and one very cooperative sky. Māori navigators didn't just memorize stars, they wove them into everything. Imagine you're 10 years old, tagging along with an elder. You don't even realize you're being taught. You're fishing, or gathering, or just lying on your back as the old man hums a song under his breath. That song? A mnemonic device. It might sound like a lullaby, but really, it's a roadmap. The lines follow the arc of the sky, placing each star in sequence. Some songs were hundreds of lines long. Recited at dawn. Rehearsed under full moons. Chanted during ceremonies. This was education by immersion, and it worked. The Tahunga navigators had to learn more than where stars rose and set. They needed to know when. And that meant understanding celestial time, what scholars now call sidereal time. Which is a fancy way of saying stars move slightly faster than the sun. Every night, a star rises for minutes earlier than it did the night before. Over time, that shift adds up. If you memorized where a particular star should appear at a certain time of night, and it showed up earlier or later, you could guess the date. Even your latitude. You read the night sky like a slow-moving clock. It's kind of infuriating how good they were at it, to be honest. You've got GPS, weather radar, phone alerts. These folks had wind, stars, the color of the water. And yet, they crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean and hit their mark without fail. Now here's the fringe-wide bit. Some oral accounts say that certain Tahunga could see star paths even during the day. Not with physical sight, but internally. Like a vision map imprinted on their thoughts. Was it metaphor? Meditation? Or something closer to synesthesia, a blending of senses? Historians still debate this. Some call it poetry. Others think there might have been real cognitive training involved. Either way, you sit with that image a while, a man standing on a cliff. Eyes closed, charting invisible routes across a sky he can't see. Then, of course, there's the transmission problem. How do you pass down this map? Not every kid wanted to be a navigator. Not every elder had a successor. Some families guarded knowledge tightly, others shared it freely. And over time, especially after colonization, many of these practices were interrupted. Suppressed. Silenced, but not erased. You picture a woman in the 20th century teaching her granddaughter an old chant that no one sings anymore. She doesn't explain the stars behind it, just sings it softly while plaiting a mat. The girl memorizes it, not knowing why. Decades later, someone hears that tune and recognizes a pattern, the positions of stars in the pre-dawn winter sky. That's how knowledge survives. Quietly. Patiently, Māori oral tradition wasn't some haphazard collection of bedtime stories. It was a data system. Think of it like a cosmic filing cabinet, each drawer labeled with a song, a star, a season, a proverb. And the beauty? It was portable. You could carry your entire navigation system in your head while walking the coastline or crossing an island chain. No scrolls. Just memory. Just mind. And the body, too. Don't forget that. Wayfinders used their bodies like instruments. The feel of the wind on your cheek, the angle of salt spray, the way your skin tingled when a certain wind current shifted, those were clues. Some Tahunga even slept in specific positions on the deck of their waka to feel subtle tilts and currents. They trained their senses the way you might train for a marathon, except they were racing across oceans with no finish line in sight. There's one strange tale told on the East Coast. An old man who, late in life, would sleep outdoors and mumble to the sky. People thought he was fading, but when he passed, his grandchildren realized he'd been reciting full navigational chants every single night. Alone. Just to keep them alive, knowledge like this has a kind of stubbornness. It sticks around, even when no one's asking. It hides in language. In proverbs. In children's songs that rhyme in just the right way to track the lunar calendar. It's low-tech, but high precision, of course. All this required immense discipline. And that meant the Tahunga had social clout. These weren't eccentric sky watchers tucked away in huts. They were advisors. Strategists. The ones who said when to sail, when to plant, when to wait. Mess up the star reading? You could lose a harvest or a canoe full of people. So there was pressure. Respect. Even fear, and yet. It was never just science. Always. There was story. Spirit. Mystery. The sky was sacred, but also hilarious. There's one chant that likens Matariki to a grandmother's crooked smile. Another calls a bright southern star the nose poker because it always showed up when kids were sneezing in winter. You smile at that. Maybe you've got a star like that in your life. A little cosmic inside joke blinking up there just for you. The sky now is paler. The stars fewer. But you know they haven't gone. They're just hidden, waiting for night to fall again. And when it does, they'll return in exactly the same order, the same rhythm. As if they never left. Now the stars are nearly gone. Only the boldest points of light remain, Tortru still clinging to the west, like it's reluctant to let go. You've spent the whole night drifting in this suspended moment, and now the tide of dawn is rising. But before we let sunlight have its say, there's one more sky trick worth remembering. You squint into the grayish blue and imagine what comes after the night sky fades, because even in full daylight, Māori navigators weren't starblind. Not by a long shot. They turned to something called Te Tako Taranga o Te Ara with Macron, the position of the sun. Not just where it rose, but how it moved across the sky, its angle, its warmth, the way it painted shadows. Like watching a great golden pendulum swing across your personal sky clock, you stand on a waka, or even on the shoreline, and tilt your head. Feel the warmth strike one cheek first. The day is young. As it warms your shoulders, you know noon is near. As it begins to dim again, the long shadows return. And when the ocean takes on that strange molten look right before sunset, you're almost home, or at least, you should be, if the day's journey has gone to plan. But there's more. So much more. Beyond the sun, beyond the stars, lies a layer of guidance so subtle most people would never think to look for it. Ocean swells. You lower your gaze now, from the heavens above to the sea below. And what you see isn't chaos. It's choreography. Māori navigators were trained to read the waves, not just surface chop, but the long, slow, powerful swells beneath. These were called Ngaru Aoe. Deep swells, birthed by distant winds days or even weeks away. They travel for hundreds of kilometers with little change in direction. You feel them, broad, lazy rolls beneath the waka, and realize, yes, they've been guiding you all along. How? Because those swells keep the same direction even when the sky is hidden. You can close your eyes and still feel your heading. A subtle lean of the canoe. A rhythm in your bones. One navigator said it felt like leaning into a lullaby. That's not poetry, that's literal. You feel your body swaying to the ocean's tempo. If it changes, you know. Instantly, but here's the brilliant part, those wave patterns overlap. Imagine you're out on open ocean, and there are two sets of swells. One from the east. One from the southwest. Where they meet. That's a clue. The interference between them, the crosshatch of waves, can tell you how far you are from land, which direction the winds are shifting. Or whether a storm is brewing over the next horizon. It's like having a compass made of rhythm. A sonar that speaks only to those who've spent enough nights listening. Here's a fun, weird fringe detail for you. Some Tahunga claimed they could hear the swells sing. Not metaphorically, audibly. Each swell direction had a tone, a sound when it lapped against the canoe hull. A constant, gentle hum, like the ocean was humming its own bedtime song. And when the tone changed, so did the path. Is it true? Or just poetic? Historians argue. Some say these stories were metaphors for deep bodily intuition. Others wonder if there's a real acoustic phenomenon at play, especially in wooden canoes over taut ocean surfaces. Whatever the case, you try to listen now, and the waves do seem to whisper, and we haven't even gotten to birds yet. Yes. Birds. Because at a certain point in your voyage, the stars vanish. The swells grow too complex. The sky goes cloudy. And that's when you start watching the mana moana, the ocean birds. You're not tracking them by accident. You're watching them on purpose. Because some birds only fly so far from land. You see a tara, tern, circling low. You know there's land within 30 kilometers. A TT, muttonbird, swooping eastward at dusk. That's the direction of its nesting cliff. Even gulls, those grumpy white clouds with wings, become celestial indicators when you know what to look for. You sit very still, letting the ocean move you, the sun warming your back, and up ahead, 3 small dots flash against the dawn, wings beating toward the horizon. You follow their path. You don't chase. You accompany. That's the difference. The birds know where they're going. You just need to trust the route. Now the fringe detail. One oral tradition tells of a single bird, part myth, part guide, that only revealed itself to the most dedicated Tahunga. It was called Te Manu o Hawaii. A spiritual bird, not seen with the eyes, but with the mind. It flew ahead of a canoe, a feathered compass that led you straight home, if your mind was calm and your purpose pure. You imagine that bird now, gliding just ahead of your drifting thoughts. Quiet. Steady. Patient, and there's more. When land was near, truly near, you didn't just see birds or smell damp soil. You began to notice floating debris. A twig. A seed pod. Even the change in sea color. Near islands, the water takes on a lighter, greener hue. And clouds? They behave differently. Certain kinds of cloud formations hang above landmasses, their bellies stained with shadows of forest and mountain. To a land navigator, clouds are just clouds. To a Tahunga, they're signposts. You shift in your mind now, pulling together the threads. The stars above. The sun's arc. The wave rhythms. The birds and sky and flotsam and clouds. It's not one thing. It's the whole thing. And it's all held not on a device, but in your mind, trained, tuned, trusted. There's an old saying among Polynesian navigators, the canoe is blind. The mind must see. That hits different now, doesn't it? And yet, despite this oceanic mastery, there's still so much we don't know. Historians still debate how some of these techniques worked in practice. Were wave patterns always so reliable? Were star paths fixed across multiple voyages? Did some of the knowledge fade even before European arrival? the scholarly silence is full of wonder. And speculation, you let that uncertainty linger. Not everything has to be pinned down. Some things, like the morning light now blooming across the ocean, are best left undefined. The sky has changed. You can't see the stars anymore. But that's okay. You remember them. You carry them. And tonight, when they return, they'll be exactly where you left them. Now the sky is all light. Blue, easy, cloud-streaked. You're fully in the day, but still held in that memory dream of how Māori navigators moved across the vast Pacific without instruments. You blink and drift forward, because now we're following them not over water, but back toward land, because let's face it, navigating open ocean was only half the challenge. The other half? Landfall. You couldn't just smash into a coastline and call it a day. You needed to arrive right. At the right place, at the right time, in the right way. And this is where things got spiritual. You feel it first. The breeze thickens with scent. Not ocean salt, but something leafy. A breath of damp fern. You squint across the waves and see a shape forming on the horizon, low, green, uneven. Not just any land. Aotearoa. The long white cloud stretched above it, as foretold, for many Māori, landfall wasn't just a relief. It was a reunion. The waka was a child returning to its parent. And just like a proper reunion, there were rituals. You didn't just pull up and start building. You gave thanks. You listened. You asked permission. This part of the journey involved karakia, sacred chants or prayers. The Tahunga would recite them to protect the crew, to calm the spirits of the land, and to bind the people to this new place. And just like the star maps, the karakia were memorized. Precise. Led with meaning. Reciting one wrong could be risky. Spiritually and socially you might find that silly, asking a hillside for permission. But you've asked far weirder things for help. Like Siri. Or that parking spot God. The difference? These invocations came with accountability. The land was alive. The ancestors were listening. If you were arrogant, or rushed, or careless, the land would let you know. Now imagine a canoe pulling into a sheltered bay, paddlers exhausted but alert, their faces painted with salt and sun. The Tahunga stands, cloak rippling, and begins the karakia. The sea hushes. The birds fall still. Even the wind leans in to listen. That chant isn't just sound. It's a signal. We have arrived. We are here. We remember. And here's where it gets even more poetic, because many believed that the stars had led them not only across space, but across time. That following those paths was also a return. A cycle. Not a conquest, but a coming home. Some oral tradition spoke of ancestors who had once left this land and were now returning generations later. Time, for the Māori, wasn't linear. It curled like a spiral, looping back over itself, so stepping onto the shore wasn't arrival. It was remembering. Now for your quirky fringe gem. There are stories, very old ones, that say certain birds would fly out to greet incoming waka long before the land was visible. Not just random flocks, but specific birds that had once been trained, released from another island, and had somehow returned. Like avian scouts. Imagine that your GPS has feathers. Historians side-eye that claim, of course. There's debate over whether birds can be that intentionally trained for long-distance guidance. But hey, pigeons can do some wild things, and if anyone could have cracked the code, it was these folks. Polynesian navigators were basically the world's OG birdwatchers, long before David Attenborough made it cool. And speaking of returning, there's another kind of landfall that mattered just as much, the spiritual one. Some voyages weren't just physical. They were symbolic. Some waka weren't heading for new homes but were retracing ancestral roots. Mapping memory. Honoring the past. It's said that certain voyages followed the path of the dead, not metaphorically, but quite literally, sailing along routes believed to mirror the journey of spirits after death. You let that idea settle for a second. That the stars weren't just guides, they were gateways. That you could follow a constellation the way you'd follow a road sign to a sacred site. And if you were quiet enough, if your thoughts were still, you might even feel the presence of someone long gone walking with you, which brings us to the idea of tapu, the sacred, the restricted. Certain lands were considered especially tapu, particularly those associated with the dead or with powerful ancestors. You didn't just wander in. You approached with respect. In some cases, only certain people were allowed to step foot there. Others had to wait, or be ritually cleansed afterward. You step lightly now. Mindfully. The grass under your feet is cool. The bush is thick, fragrant with moss and leaf. Somewhere ahead, a stream gurgles. You're walking the edge between exploration and reverence. That tension defined many early landfalls, how to build something new without erasing what came before. Māori traditions tell of Wenua-Tupuna, ancestral lands that remember. Lands that hold the echo of footsteps. That know the sound of a chant whispered at dawn. That can tell, even after generations, when someone has come home. It's a humbling thought. That you might walk through a forest and the trees already know your name. So how did the early settlers find where to build? Where to plant? Hunt, thrive? The stars didn't stop helping just because the canoe beached. They still offered signs, seasonal markers, cues for when the birds nested or the eels returned to the rivers. You watched the moon. You read the tides. You noticed when the light hit a particular rock face just so, and marked that moment with a carving, a story, a name, because land is only mysterious if you're not paying attention. Once you do, it becomes a book written in green and blue and stone. There's one final tale worth tucking under your pillow. It's said that the first landfall was foretold in a dream. That one of the earliest navigators saw Aotearoa not with their eyes, but in a vision, an island draped in mist, mountains sharp as shark teeth, and that long white cloud beckoning like a finger. They followed that dream. Across oceans. Through storms. Guided by stars, birds, waves, and memory. And when they arrived, the dream matched the real thing, down to the curve of the bay. Now you look at the shoreline and think, maybe dreams are just memories that haven't happened yet. The land is beneath your feet now. Real, solid, damp with dew. It feels impossibly still after the rhythm of the ocean. No more endless rocking. No more stars overhead. Just tree trunks, moss, and birdsong echoing like chimes from deep inside the bush. But don't relax too fast, your journey isn't over. In fact, for many Māori, landfall marked the beginning of the deeper navigation through mountains, forests, valleys, and eventually to the underworld. Yes. You heard that right. Not metaphorically, the underworld was a destination. And those same navigational instincts that led canoes across the ocean? They were used to trace the hidden paths of the dead beneath the earth. You crouch by a trickling stream now. Hands in the cold water, and imagine that someone, many someones, once believed this was a threshold. A portal. Māori cosmology describes Rarohenga, the underworld, as a realm where ancestors reside. Peaceful, shadowed, and rich in knowledge. Not hell, not punishment. But a kind of ancestral library, deep beneath the land, where spirits return to be with those who came before. So how do you navigate to that? The answer? Star paths again, but inverted. You blink and look up at the sky, not for guidance, but for reflection. Because Māori saw the world as mirrored. What exists above has a version below. As above, so below. Which means the stars weren't just maps for physical journeys, they were also blueprints for spiritual ones. Certain constellations mark not travel across the sea, but travel beneath the earth. You may have heard of Matariki, the Pleiades cluster. It's famous now as a symbol of Māori New Year, but it also had funerary significance. Its heliacal rising, when it reappeared before dawn, was a sign that spirits had completed their journey to Rarohenga. You could almost picture them walking across the sky, vanishing into the dark beyond the horizon. But let's get more specific. There's a traditional concept called Te-Ara Wairua, the spirit path. It's the route spirits take after death, journeying to Cape Raynor, the northernmost point of the North Island. There, it's said, they descend the roots of an ancient Futukawa tree into the sea, and then on to Rarohenga. You stand at the edge of that cliff now, toes curled on the stone, wind in your hair, and feel it, the tug. The invisible thread. You can't see the roots, but you know they're there, and here's the twist. Those same celestial markers that guided Waka through the Pacific also hovered over Te-Ara Wairua. Māori star priests believed that particular stars watched over that path. That as spirits walked north, they were accompanied, escorted, by light. Navigation, again. Just in a quieter direction. Want something fringe? Here's a beauty. Some Tahunga claimed that you could hear the spirits moving along the path at night, especially near certain sacred locations. A breeze with no source. A whisper under your ear. A rustling in the flax. Not scary, just acknowledged. A reminder that navigation wasn't just practical, it was emotional. Familial. An act of reunion, and if that's a little intense for bedtime, don't worry, there's still humor in it. One old tale warns of a traveler who accidentally camped on a spirit trail and spent all night wondering why he kept losing his blanket. Spirits, apparently, aren't great at sharing. You step back from the cliff now, brush the wind from your face, and wander deeper inland. Because here's something clever, the star paths didn't end at sea or in the underworld. They were woven into the very land. Māori would name hills and ridges based on the stars they pointed to. If you stood on a certain peak and looked east, the notch in the horizon lined up with a specific constellation during a certain season. Land became compass, the forest became calendar. And here's your quirky gem, some navigators memorized entire genealogies of hills. Not just their names, but their lineage. This peak is the child of that ridge, which came from that river, which was born of that mountain. It wasn't nonsense. It was geography as memory palace. A way to walk through space and time, simultaneously. Sound familiar? It should. Remember how the ocean was read like a map? Now the land is, too. Same skills, different textures. You walk through a clearing now and pause. The sky overhead is pale blue. The wind smells like ferns and stone. You wonder if someone once stood here, generations ago, trying to remember which way the sacred path ran, whether they were standing on it. Whether they should step aside, because that was part of the skill, too. Knowing when not to walk forward. When to pause. When to kneel. When to listen. Historians love this part. Or argue about it, at least. Some insist that these spiritual routes were symbolic, not literal. Others say the evidence of sacred paths is all over Aotearoa, stone markers, ancient carvings, and place names that whisper hints when translated. But no one agrees completely. Historians still debate whether these star paths to the underworld were purely metaphoric or part of a structured spiritual geography known intimately by Tahunga and passed down with incredible precision, and that's okay. Some things are meant to remain partly veiled. What's clear is that the same attention, discipline, and reverence that allowed Māori to cross oceans by star was also used to trace the inner geography of their own homeland, both the physical and the spiritual. Navigation wasn't just a way to get somewhere. It was a way to belong, and maybe, in your own way, you felt that too. That quiet nudge that says, go this way. Trust this road. Remember that old dream. Sometimes, your mind is the best compass you've got. You brush the leaves from your arm. Step forward. The trail disappears into shadow. But you don't panic. You've walked by starlight before. The trees begin to thin, the sky stretches wider, and the scent of wood smoke curls faintly in the air, as if someone, somewhere ahead, has kept a fire burning just for you. And as you walk, you begin to notice something, the way the light pulls differently at your feet. Not quite sun. Not quite shadow. More like memory. That's fitting, because tonight, still tonight, somehow you're drifting deeper into the mind of the navigator. Not just how they sailed or where they landed, but how they taught. Because celestial navigation wasn't written down. There were no textbooks. No diagrams. No star paths for dummies. Everything was passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation. And it had to be remembered perfectly. So how do you memorize an ocean? Let's begin with a waka school. You kneel in a sandy clearing, warm wood under your fingertips, and the Tahunga is there, equal parts scientist, storyteller, and psychologist. No white robes. No mystical fog machines. Just someone with stars in their head and time in their voice. He begins not with the stars, but with a chant. A karakia. His voice rises, falls, curls through the trees. It doesn't explain, it opens. It primes your brain, tunes it to the frequency of learning. This isn't Hogwarts. It's harder. The lessons won't be repeated. You get one shot to remember. Everything is high stakes, the learning is oral, rhythmic, and often set to movement. You sway with the cadence of the waka. You chant names of stars in a spiral pattern, mimicking the vault of the night sky. You hum the pulse of a coming storm, feel it under your skin, learn to recognize it by vibration alone. And then there are the memory aids, clever ones. Stories. Mnemonics. Even jokes. Did you know there's an old Polynesian trick for remembering wind directions based on the way your hair parts during storms? It's oddly accurate. And once, a canoe apprentice who couldn't remember a certain star's name was made to eat a particular bitter root every time he forgot. By the 10th try, he never forgot again. Education with consequences, now the quirky gem. In some parts of Polynesia, navigators in training were blindfolded at sea. They'd be spun, disoriented, then asked to tell direction based only on the feel of the ocean. The swell. The subtle pitch of the canoe. The taste of the wind. It sounds harsh until you realize they were being trained to think like water. To become part of the vessel, part of the voyage. No map can give you that. The learning wasn't just intellectual. It was embodied. You became the tool. The compass. The sextant. That's why navigators held such status. They weren't just knowledgeable, they were knowledge. Living, breathing repositories of ancestral memory. Now lean in a bit, because there's a hidden layer here, one whispered more than taught. Navigation was deeply gendered in some traditions. Not forbidden to women necessarily, but often dominated by men. Yet, in many iwi, women were the guardians of story, the genealogists, the spiritual anchors. Some oral histories hint that female Tahunga held just as much knowledge of the star paths, particularly those tied to life, birth, and death. After all, who better to understand cycles, but whether man or woman, Tahunga were chosen young. You didn't volunteer. You were recognized. Someone saw something in your gaze, a focus, a hunger, maybe even a light, and said, You'll remember what the rest of us forget. And once chosen, you trained for years. Decades. Navigation wasn't something you picked up in your 20s after a gap year. It was a calling. A discipline. And when you were ready, you didn't get a diploma. You got silence. Trust. The next voyage, now, here's where it gets even cooler. Some knowledge was encoded into song lines. These were lyrical maps, verses that described not only where to go, but when. Star rise, moon phase, wave pattern, all baked into melody. The song might sound like a lullaby, but it was a full-on navigational database. Hum the tune, and you'd remember the reef. Sing it slower, and you'd recall which current came next. You're starting to get it now, aren't you? That navigation wasn't just about movement. It was about memory. about carrying something that would otherwise vanish, and speaking of vanishing, historians often fret over how much knowledge has been lost. Some traditions were nearly erased during colonization. Missionaries and settlers saw hunger practices as pagan, and many were outlawed or driven underground. Star law was replaced by compasses. Ocean pathways gave way to maps with lines and numbers. So yes, historians still debate just how complete our modern understanding is. Whether we've recovered enough. Whether we even can, but here's the tin: recent decades, there's been a resurgence. Māori scholars, navigators, elders, they're digging back into the oral traditions. Reconnecting the dots. Rebuilding waka. Sailing without instruments again. One famous revivalist navigator, Nainoa Thompson, trained in Hawaii but was deeply influenced by Māori techniques. And now there's an entire generation of Polynesian youth looking up at the stars, not for Instagram, but for answers. Knowledge isn't always lost. Sometimes it's just resting. In recent decades, there's been a resurgence. Māori scholars, navigators, elders, they're digging back into the oral traditions, reconnecting the dots. Rebuilding waka. Sailing without instruments again. One famous revivalist navigator, Nainoa Thompson, trained in Hawaii but was deeply influenced by Māori techniques. And now there's an entire generation of Polynesian youth looking up at the stars, not for Instagram, but for answers. You feel that spark in your chest. That's hope. It burns quietly, like the fire you smelled earlier. Banked, but steady. Waiting, the Tahunga steps back now. You've repeated the chant 3 times. You've traced the star pattern in the dirt. You've felt the rhythm of the ocean in your knees. You could forget, but you won't, and as you walk away from the lesson, head full of constellations and sea wind and strange roots you're never eating again, you realize something: the stars were never just above. They were always within. You're back on the ocean now. Same sky, different skin. You've learned the chants, you've memorized the curves of starlight, and now, at last, you feel it, that subtle thrill beneath your ribs. You're ready to navigate, but don't let that ego puff too high. Even seasoned Tahunga would admit, each voyage was a gamble. The ocean was no tame highway. It changed, whispered, misled. One false reading, one stubborn gust, and you could drift weeks off course, or vanish. And yet, they sailed anyway. Tonight, you'll feel what it means to steer through the Pacific without tools. Nothing but the heavens, the sea, and your own body. Your waka cuts across the water like a blade. You've left land behind, no more landmarks to cheat with. Just the dome of the sky and the pulse of the waves. Above you, the stars bloom out, one by one, like memories. You start with Te Ikale Mui, the fish of Mui, a constellation strung across the southern sky. Māori saw this as a cosmic fishhook, tied to the story of Mui pulling the islands from the sea. Folklore and function wrapped together. You use it to mark your angle, noting its rise behind your shoulder, but it's not enough to just know which stars exist. You need to know when they appear. Where? How high they climb before dawn. Which vanish first. You track Wakahu, the rising stars, and Te, the standing stars, those that hover directly overhead, your celestial breadcrumbs. And yes, the sky does move. Slowly. Betrayingly. Each star has a season, a path, a trick. You squint at Ruhwa and Teres, burning faintly red. In some traditions, it marked the height of summer. In others, a healer star, powerful enough to draw disease from the body. Either way, its position tells you where the waka is heading, and more importantly, if it's not heading where it should. But hey, the sky isn't always kind. Clouds roll in. Storms snuff out your ceiling map. So what then? That's when the ocean takes over. Here's the genius of it. Māori and other Polynesian navigators read the sea like a second sky. Swell patterns, currents, even the echoes of distant landmasses. you lean over the side of your waka, hand brushing the surface, and you can feel it, the long, low heave of a distant swell from the southeast. That's Moana Wakararo, one of the deep rhythms. You read it like a sentence. Even wind has character. A northeaster feels different on your cheek than a southern gust. Some navigators could predict an island's presence by the color of the clouds above the horizon. Islands reflect heat. That heat rises. Clouds form above. So yes, sometimes a puff of cloud was the only hint you were close to land. Now here's a slightly odd bit. Flying birds were also signs, obviously, but not just because they go home to roost. Some navigators claimed certain birds were drawn to waka with tahunga aboard, as if the birds recognized spiritual authority. That's debated, obviously. Historians still argue whether such behavior was mystical or just keen observation disguised as law. But admit it, you kind of hope it's true. You glance down and notice something else, bioluminescence. Little green sparks under your hull, like fairies swimming upside down. You remember an old teaching, some waka would follow the trail of glowing plankton. Especially near reefs. A natural runway. A dream carved in algae. But you can't steer with pretty lights alone. You kneel beside the lead navigator, his gaze fixed, unblinking, on nothing. He's not staring at anything. He's feeling. Each subtle pitch of the canoe tells him where the currents pull. He mutters to himself, not fearfully, just rhythmically. Like he's talking to the ocean. Or maybe to himself. Or maybe to someone who died centuries ago and still rides with him. You glance at the stars again. They're back, peeking through the thinning clouds. Time to adjust course. The navigator shifts the sail with a flick of his hand. You mimic him, learning without words. He points to Matariki, low on the horizon now, and you whisper the chant you memorized during training. You don't know what half of it means. But it makes you feel braver. Quirk time, some navigators painted small star charts on the insides of their eyelids. Okay, not literally. But they would stare at the night sky for hours before sleep, burning the positions into memory. Then, in dreams, they'd rehearse routes. Sleep navigation. Night brain rehearsal. No Apple Watch required, and here's something delightfully weird. One Polynesian mnemonic involved tasting the ocean. Not just for saltiness, but to judge temperature, mineral traces, freshness. It said some could tell how far from freshwater runoff they were just by swishing a little seawater around their mouth. Try that on a yacht. As dawn starts to bleed across the sky, you feel it, you've held course. The stars told you where to begin. The sea whispered where to stay. And now, on the edge of morning, land is near, you squint at the horizon, and sure enough, there's a faint line. Not cloud. Not mirage. Something solid. You did it. Or rather, you participated. You listened. You learned. This is the essence of traditional Māori navigation, cooperation with nature. A humility that says, I don't conquer the ocean. I converse with it. Historians still debate how accurate the traditional estimates are. Some say these journeys were half luck, that stories were exaggerated over time. Others argue the precision was far greater than Westerners gave credit for. But all agree, the knowledge passed down through generations was deep, flexible, and utterly profound. You sit back in the waka now. The sky is pale pink. Birds call from the direction of shore. Someone behind you is already chanting thanks. You close your eyes and feel the sea rock beneath you or like a cradle. You've crossed a world. Without instruments. Without metal. Just memory, starlight, and a shared heartbeat, and still, the journey isn't over. Land grows slowly, as if it's shy. A faint line at first, then a smudge, then hills, cliffs, forests, until finally, you see it clearly, the shore of Hawaii. Or Rarohenga. Or just the next island in a long celestial relay race. You've made it, though no one speaks it aloud. Arrivals are quiet, almost sacred, like slipping into a dream you're not ready to wake from. But the thing is, you're not just here to make landfall. You're here to understand what land means. Because for the Māori, land was never just land. It was ancestor. It was repository. It was the final verse in the song of a voyage that began in the stars. Your feet touch ground and it's almost unnerving. The ocean, for all its danger, had rhythm. This place? It hums a different frequency. Wind through trees, insects buzzing like nervous thoughts, and a sudden stillness that makes your heart feel too loud. And then someone steps forward to greet you. They don't ask, "Where are you from?" They ask, "Care wai ko?" Who are you? The difference matters. Because your identity, in Māori thought, is traced not through geography but through Wakapapa, a lineage that reaches back to stars, to gods, to soil and wave alike. Now this is where things get tangled and wonderful. The Māori believed their ancestors came from Hawaii, a homeland somewhere in the Pacific, perhaps mythical, perhaps real. The arrival of the waka from Hawaii is celebrated in chants, carvings, and place names across Aotearoa. Each waka had its own crew, stories, and descendants. They didn't just arrive and disappear. They became the bones of the land, literally. In some cases, the waka themselves were buried, turned into sacred ground. But here's the twist. Some iwi, or tribes, also claim that people were already here when the great waka arrived. Not many, but some. Spirits, shadow folk, or early settlers from an even older migration. Whether metaphor or memory, the tension exists in the stories. Historians still debate this one. Is it symbolic? Evidence of multiple waves of migration? Or just the way memory folds into myth? Either way, you walk through this new land with a growing realization: the voyage doesn't end with arrival. It continues into relationship, with place, with people, with past. That's where Māori come in. These are not just community centers. They are living genealogical maps, tied to specific ancestors. Specific waka. To walk onto a marae is to enter a world of carved symbols, chants, protocols. Each pole, each arch, represents someone, something. Even the roof beam may symbolize a spine, the backbone of your lineage. A newcomer? You don't just walk in. You're welcomed through a whiri, a formal greeting ceremony, where past and present meet across words, song, and ritual. There's often a wiro, or challenge. A warrior steps forward, lays down a token, watches how you respond. Not to intimidate. To test intent. Are you here to connect or consume? Assuming you pass, you're greeted with honji, the pressing of foreheads and noses. Breath exchanged. Presence acknowledged. Think of it like a cultural fingerprint, intimate and unmistakably human. Now, the quirky bit: in some marae, carvings are given cheeky personalities. One might represent a cunning ancestor, eyebrows forever raised in suspicion. Another might be painted with exaggerated nostrils, hinting at a love of gossip. These aren't just totems, they're stories in wood, humor preserved in grain. The carvings smirk. They've seen everything. And as you sit cross-legged on the woven mats, your host points up to the tuku-tuku panels, laced patterns along the walls. They're not decoration. They're woven code. A kind of symbolic language, each pattern representing battles, alliances, navigations, harvests. Look closely, and you might notice a set of black and white stitches repeating down a column. That might be Roimata Taroa, the albatross's tears, mourning for someone lost at sea. You trace the pattern with your eyes, and suddenly you're not tired anymore. You're listening to a story without sound. And then someone begins to speak. It's not a lecture. It's Wakapapa, a recitation of lineage that may go on for hours. Not just names. Events. Migrations. Arrivals. Departures. The pattern of a people drawn through time, and it matters, this recitation. Because for the Māori, knowing where you come from is knowing where you are. You're not a tourist here. You're a stitch in a larger cloak. Or at least, you could be. You ask someone quietly if this is all taught in school. They laugh gently. Some of it. But most is learned by heart, by ear, by being here. And then they gesture to a wall-sized carving of a waka splitting a wave. That's how my great-great-great-grandmother came here, they say. I see her every time I visit. There's comfort in that, and if you step outside, under the stars again, you realize the land is mapped not just through stories, but through orientation. Some marae are built to face the rising sun. Others face ancestral islands. Still others align with star paths. You look up and see Torturu, Orion's belt, shimmering like a ladder. Remember it. You used it at sea. It hasn't moved. You have. It's strange, this land feels just as celestial as the ocean. Different rhythm. Same song. And as you walk back to your sleeping space, the grass cool beneath your soles, you feel the journey settle into your bones. Not as an endpoint, but as inheritance. The land cradles you now, just as the sea once did. You are between stories. Between stars. Between breaths and the wind? It still carries salt. The next morning, you wake to the delicate crackle of birdsong, filtered sunlight brushing your eyelids. The land around you hums quietly, moist soil, crisp leaves, the faint scent of kawakawa and manuka. You remember the ocean, but now your feet are planted firm on this island, one of many in the vast Pacific quilt. Your guides tell you about Taumata, the sacred hills and peaks that punctuate the landscape. These aren't just geological features but vertical markers on the spiritual map. Each Taumata is believed to be a pathway to the underworld, Rarohenga, the realm of spirits, ancestors, and gods. To the Māori, the cosmos folds vertically, the sky above, the world of the living at your feet. And the underworld beneath, you imagine descending those steep slopes, walking down the stone steps of another dimension. The boundaries between life and death aren't firm lines here. They're more like veils, shifting with the seasons, the tides, the stars. There's a particular hill near your camp, called Mongahau, or Mount Eden, that's more than just a dormant volcano. It's a spiritual ladder, the place where some believe souls pass through after leaving the living world. You listen as your guide explains how some Māori performed wakanoa, rituals to cleanse and prepare the dead for this journey, ensuring they pass safely through Rarohenga. But what's fascinating is how navigation ties directly into this concept. You thought star paths were only for crossing oceans, but the Māori used them to map journeys to the underworld, too. The same constellations that guide the canoe home could also lead a spirit to its next resting place. Think about that. The stars you tracked last night, the same ones that map your ocean passage, are also guides for the dead. In a way, this makes your journey even more profound. You're not just moving through space but through the layers of existence. Now, here's a quirky twist. In some Māori traditions, the soul's journey to the underworld involves following a star called Matariki, the Pleiades cluster. When Matariki rises at dawn, it signals both the start of a new year and the time when souls depart to Rarohenga. Some say it's like a cosmic bus stop for spirits. Others argue this is poetic metaphor, but the symbolism is beautiful. You lean against a tree and watch the clouds drift. The land feels alive with invisible pathways. The moss under your fingers seems older than time, whispering secrets you can almost hear if you listen hard enough. Your guide shares a story about Te Rerenga Wairua, the leap of spirits. It's said that at certain cliffs, souls leap across the gap between worlds, carried by the wind. You close your eyes and picture it, a silent leap into starlight, a glide on the breath of the night. Historians still debate how literal these stories were intended, or if they were more symbolic lessons for the living. But the overlap between navigation, cosmology, and spirituality here is undeniable. The Māori worldview is like a tapestry where ocean, land, sky, and spirit are threads woven tightly together. You decide to explore a nearby cave, rumored to be an entrance to the underworld. Inside, the air is cool and damp. Your footsteps echo softly, and for a moment, the boundary between worlds feels thin. The walls are etched with ancient carvings, spirals, figures, patterns that pulse with meaning. You trace your fingers along one spiral, thinking about how the ocean currents and star paths are just as complex and layered. Navigation, after all, is more than moving from point A to point B. It's a dance with time, memory, and place. Outside, a sudden breeze stirs the trees. The day grows warmer, but you feel a chill, not of cold, but of awe. You realize that every journey you've taken across the waves, under the stars, into this land, has been about connection. To ancestors, to the earth, to the invisible threads that bind past and present, and somewhere, just beyond the horizon, the next star waits to guide you. The sun slips lower, and the day's golden light softens the edges of everything around you. You find yourself drawn to the coast again, to the rhythmic pulse of waves breaking on the shore. You remember the stories about Te-Ara Waka, the canoe pathways, not just literal routes across water but sacred trails etched into memory, myth, and land. You're told these pathways crisscross the Pacific like invisible highways, linking islands, peoples, and stories. Each Waka voyage wasn't a solitary sprint but part of an immense network, an oceanic web of knowledge, kinship, and survival. One thing surprises you: not all voyages were about discovery or conquest. Some were about return. Navigators often undertook journeys to find missing kin, to renew alliances, or to follow the calling of ancestral lands. The ocean was a thread, pulling people back home again and again, and this brings you to an intriguing detail: star compasses. You thought these were purely celestial, but they had earthly counterparts. Some navigators used landmarks, ocean swells, and wildlife to confirm star positions. One famous technique involved watching the flight patterns of frigate birds, which rarely venture far from land. If frigate birds were seen heading inland at dawn, that signaled proximity to an island. You watch a group of seabirds glide effortlessly overhead, their wings catching the last light. Someone remarks that some birds are like natural GPS units, reading the subtle changes in air pressure and magnetic fields. Quirky fact: the Māori also used Te Weo Rongo, the House of Peace, a traditional celestial house aligned with specific stars. It was both a teaching tool and spiritual symbol, blending navigation and philosophy. This star house was seen as a kind of celestial classroom, where navigators learned the secrets of the sea and sky. There's a humbling beauty in that. Navigation wasn't just about survival, it was a form of education, of right, of respect. You sit by a fire with the elders, and they tell you about Nga with Macron Actua, the gods who watch over travelers. Tangaroa, god of the sea, commands respect and requires offerings for safe passage. Tneen, god of forests, guards the land. You realize the ocean and land were realms governed by different spirits, but your journey bridges them both, and sometimes these stories seem contradictory. One Waka tale celebrates bravery and conquest, another warns of hubris and loss. Some navigators are revered as demigods, others are cautionary examples. Historians still debate how much of this was myth, how much was history, and how much was a blend crafted to teach moral lessons. But for you, the stories feel alive, like whispers from the past shaping your present. Night falls, and the sky fills with stars again, so many that it's hard to pick just one. You lie back and trace the patterns, remembering how the ancients read them like a book. You wonder, how did they keep so much knowledge alive without written records? The answer, you learn, is oral tradition, a living library passed down through chants, dances, and stories, with every listener a guardian of memory. It's a fragile yet powerful system. One that demands attention, respect, and care. As the embers fade, you feel connected, not just to the Māori navigators of old, but to every human who has ever looked up and wondered where the stars might lead. And in that vast, starry silence, you find a quiet comfort. Morning creeps over the horizon, and you wake wrapped in a gentle fog, the kind that seems to carry secrets from another time. You step outside and breathe in the damp air, the mingling scent of salt, earth, and wildflowers grounding you back into this place. Today, your guides want to show you the tools, not just the stories, but the actual instruments Māori navigators crafted to read the stars and see. First, there's the tiki, a carved wooden headpiece worn by chiefs and skilled navigators. Its intricate designs aren't merely ornamental, they're coded maps of star paths, waves, and winds. You learn that in some tribes, the tiki could be worn during rituals to invoke the guidance of ancestral navigators. Almost like a physical connection to the cosmos, then comes the patu, the short club, often intricately carved. While primarily a weapon, it sometimes featured symbols meant to protect the wielder from spiritual dangers on long voyages, but the most fascinating is the star compass itself, an invisible one, made not of wood or stone, but of mental maps. These weren't diagrams you'd find in a textbook. Instead, navigators memorized the rising and setting points of key stars along the horizon, mentally dividing the sky into zones and directions. They tracked how stars moved throughout the night and across seasons, adjusting their courses with uncanny precision. One quirky fact you didn't expect: some navigators reportedly used their own breath as a measuring stick, timing the interval between star appearances and disappearances by counting breaths or heartbeats. It sounds a little like meditation, and maybe it was a method of tuning the body and mind to the rhythms of the cosmos. Your guide smiles and says, navigating was as much about patience and presence as it was about skill. You nod, realizing it's not so different from how you might try to calm your mind before sleep, focusing on breath and sensation. There's also the rakau, wooden sticks used to measure waves and currents. By feeling the water's pulse against the hull, skilled navigators could infer the proximity of islands or underwater reefs, and of course, the waka itself. Its design is a masterpiece of both engineering and cultural expression. Each curve, each lash, each carving has purpose, balancing seaworthiness with spiritual protection. You lean closer to inspect a model waka and notice the prow is carved with a fierce face, meant to ward off evil spirits. In some traditions, the waka is considered a living being, deserving of respect and care. It strikes you that every element, tool, story, ritual, is a thread in a larger fabric. A fabric woven tight enough to withstand the relentless push of the sea and the mystery of the stars. Historians still puzzle over how such a sophisticated system developed so independently from Western navigation traditions. Some suggest a blend of trial, error, oral tradition, and cosmic observation. Others argue there might have been earlier contacts between Pacific peoples and other ancient civilizations. You think of how, in many cultures, navigation was a sacred art, guarded by priests and chiefs. In Māori culture, that sacredness is palpable, still alive in those star patterns and carved wood. As the day wears on, you feel a quiet reverence building, a sense of standing at a crossroads between past and present, between the practical and the spiritual. And when evening descends, you sit once more beneath the stars, the tools of navigation both tangible and intangible weaving through your thoughts. The stars are no longer just distant lights but familiar guides, trusted companions on your own journey, wherever that might lead. You find yourself standing once more at the edge of the world you've traversed, land behind you, sea still singing its lullaby, and sky overhead fading toward a softer blue. Everything feels both familiar and distant, as if the threads of life are loosening their grip, preparing to send you onward. You recall standing under the same sky as ancient Māori navigators, reading constellations like pages in a sacred book. Now you're here to witness the final descent, to join those who have traveled before, following the path that leads beneath. In Māori belief, the voyage to Rarohenga, the underworld, was as natural a journey as waking from sleep. People didn't fear it, they prepared for it. Historically, funerary rites included placing small carvings and offerings on waka-shaped coffins, symbolically guiding the deceased along the same star paths once used for ocean crossings. This practice persisted at least until the late 19th century, when missionaries began to discourage traditional ceremonies. It's remarkable, even after European contact, many communities continued these rites in secret, honoring ancestral methods for guiding spirits to their resting place. You stand quietly, imagining a long-ago community gathered on a coastal bluff at dawn, chanting a karakia to send their loved one on the final journey. The rising Māori cluster glimmered at the horizon, a cluster of 7 stars known as a harbinger of the new year, but also a signpost for spirits departing this world. They sang not with mourning, but with celebration and reverence, understanding that the boundaries between life and death were permeable. Now, as you trace your gaze to those same stars, you feel their presence like a familiar friend. You remember Torturu, Orion's belt, hovering low, its 3 stars aligned like pillars marking the entrance to another realm. According to some carvings found at Wera Bar, as early as 1288 CE, Māori chefs would place 3 small gourds on a carved wooden stand to represent those stars during funerary ceremonies. That physical evidence, unearthed by archaeologists, underscores how integrated cosmology was in daily life and death. There's a fringe detail you've heard whispered in hushed tones. Some Tahunga believed that if you recited a particular chant in reverse, you could delay the spirit's journey, keep a loved one for an extra night by inverting their star path. That idea sits awkwardly beside the more common belief that death was inevitable and should be embraced. Still, the story persists in a few tribal pockets, passed down by elders who warn that trying to bend cosmic order comes at great risk. Whether literal or metaphorical, it serves as a reminder that some paths should not be tampered with. You tuck a strand of hair behind your ear and follow a narrow, winding trail through ancient prairie trees whose roots seem to twist into the earth like gnarled fingers pointing downward. Mossy stones mark the path, each carved with spirals or koru patterns, symbols of life unfolding and returning. As your feet tread carefully, you feel time stretching and folding, the past and future collapsing into this single journey. Even the air seems thicker, charged with the collective memories of those who have taken this path before you. Midway down the trail, you pause at a shallow pool where faint reflections of the sky glimmer on the surface. Locals say this pool is called Tei Puri, the water of sadness, and that its stillness holds echoes of every soul who brushed past its edge. Tradition holds that if you peer into the water at twilight, you might see not your own reflection but a fleeting glimpse of the person you will become on the other side, a subtle nod to the idea that identity transcends death. Historians still argue about whether such sites were intentionally chosen for their reflective quality or if the stories grew over time to imbue natural features with spiritual significance. Some scholars suggest that many of these pools were simply convenient markers on high-traffic routes. Their spiritual stories added later to reinforce communal values. Others counter that oral histories, corroborated by early European observers, confirm long-standing legends about such places. The debate continues, but its very existence highlights how tightly woven mythology and geography are in Māori culture. You breathe in deeply, the scent of damp earth and rotting leaf filling your lungs. A cool breeze stirs the ferns, and you can almost hear the faint echo of a chant, so soft you wonder if your mind is playing tricks. You step forward, descending a wooden ladder patched with braided flax cords. Each rung is worn by countless footsteps, some mortal, some spectral. You reach the bottom where a small wooden shrine stands. Carved in the shape of a waka prow, its face gentle and watchful. Here, families would leave tiny offerings, kachiri fish bones, feathers, or a tuft of hair, tokens for their loved ones to carry into the darkness below. You place your hand on the prow and whisper a prayer that reverberates in your bones. Guide me, as you guided them. Let my journey be gentle, let my spirit be known. You lean closer, feeling the grain beneath your fingertips, and wonder if the wood still trembles with the energy of those ancient chants. Beyond the shrine, a narrow tunnel slopes downward, lit by faint torches that flicker against walls carved with deep designs, spirals, human figures with outstretched arms, and star motifs. You recognize images of Māori, Torturu, and Ruhwa, each symbol guiding you inward. The air grows cooler, the sound of dripping water echoing like a distant heartbeat. You notice a small niche carved into the rock. Housing a single shell, a cowrie, likely traded from islands far to the north. Its presence here hints at expansive trade networks and shared cosmologies across Polynesia. That cowrie shell, placed at a depth where sunlight never reaches, speaks of journeys both physical and spiritual. It's a mainstream historical fact that Polynesian seafaring networks extended across thousands of kilometers by the early 2nd millennium CE, exchanging everything from bird plumage to ceremonial shells. Such objects carried meaning well beyond their earthly origins. A soft hum permeates the air as you reach a crossroads in the tunnel. One path slopes left, marked by a carving of a taniwha, a guardian spirit, its eyes carved from pora shell, iridescent and inscrutable. The other path slopes right, flanked by koru spirals that seem to pulse with faint bioluminescence. Guides say that those choosing left must confront the taniwha's challenge, face their fears, perhaps recall regrets, before continuing. Those who choose right are said to walk more swiftly but with less reflection, trusting the spirals to carry them physically onward. You hesitate, remembering the old story of a brave young woman who chose left and emerged from the underworld weeping wise tears. Her heart softened by truth she sought. You choose left, reverence rooting your feet. As you advance, the corridor widens, revealing a cavern with a domed ceiling dripping with stalactites. In the center, an underground pool reflects torchlight, and the water's black mirror stretches like a portal. The air here carries a low vibration, a hum that you feel in your chest as much as you hear. You kneel at the edge, gaze into the water, and see your reflection, eyes wide, heart steady, and behind it, faint ripples that look like dancing spirits just beyond the surface. A guide chants softly at your side, Her Atura with Macron, Etey Rua, descend, beloved spirit, into still waters. The chant fades into the echoing chamber, and you sense your own pulse synchronizing with its rhythm. Your body loosens. Your thinking slows. You recall how different cultures have imagined underworlds, Hades, Sheol, the Duat, but this place feels neither bleak nor fiery. It feels calm. Familiar. It feels home. A mainstream historical note, by the mid-1800s, some Māori communities had begun to syncretize Christian beliefs with ancestral ideas of Rarohenga, viewing it less as a physical realm and more as a spiritual state. Missionary records from 1845 mention Māori pastors adapting the concept of heaven and hell, blending them with traditional myths. That blending highlights how adaptable and enduring Māori navigational and spiritual frameworks have been, even in the face of profound cultural upheaval. Inside the cavern, the boundary between worlds feels porous. The flickering torchlight transforms into starlight reflections in the water, and for a moment, you feel suspended, neither above nor below. Neither alive nor gone. A fringe detail drifts to mind. Some elders claim that, under certain conditions, you can hear voices beneath the water, soft, indecipherable whispers of ancestors offering guidance. Skeptics dismiss it as the echo of water dripping or wind whistling through gaps. Historians still debate whether such accounts were meant literally or as metaphorical expressions of community memory. But listening closely, you swear you hear rhythmic murmurs, indistinct yet comforting. You exhale and dip your fingers in the cool water. The surface wrinkles like a disturbed reflection in a dream. You close your eyes and feel the craft of those who carved this underworld path. Remembering your own journey from ocean navigator to land traveler to spiritual voyager. Every step you've taken has mirrored the movement of stars, the flow of currents, the pulse of bird flight, and now the quiet descent of spirits. You stand slowly, turning away from the pool and beginning the ascent, this time toward a faint glow ahead that promises return. Every whisker of doubt or fear you carried feels lighter, carried off by the soft hum that still resonates. As you climb, a faint breeze seems to push you upward, guiding you back toward the world you know. You emerge into a cavern mouth where dawn light filters through a canopy of ferns. The air feels warm, alive, and new. You take a deep breath and step forward, leaving the underworld path behind but carrying its lessons with you. You feel transformed, like a canoe reborn from the sea, ready to carry new stories, new journeys, new dreamers. Slow now. Allow each breath to settle into your chest, slow, steady, gentle. The world around you has softened, as if the edges of everything have been brushed with a pale, calm light. You stand where earth, sea, and sky meet, each one whispering a final lullaby. You feel safe here, carried in the hush of dawn's glow, in the warmth of ancient stones beneath your feet. Imagine each footstep leaving behind a worry, a question, a flicker of doubt, dissolving into the soft earth. Let the scent of fern and salt cradle you as you exhale, letting go. Your heart has traced journeys across oceans, through forests, into the underworld, and now it rests. Remember the stars that guided you, Umatariki's glow. Torturu's steady pulse, and know they remain above, unwavering. Feel their presence like a gentle hand on your shoulder, a promise that even when darkness feels near, there is always light to guide you home. Know that you are part of something vast, the thread of ancestry, the hum of memories, the rhythm of waves and wind. Your journey does not end when you close your eyes, it continues in dreams, in stories whispered under night skies, in quiet moments of wonder when you catch a flicker of starlight in the corner of your eye. Rest now, knowing each breath is a gift, each heartbeat a drum guiding your soul. Tomorrow, the world will awaken, but for now, you remain suspended between worlds, safe, cherished, whole. Let your mind drift, unfurl, and sink into soft places. Trust the path you've walked and the path that awaits in dreams. Good night, gentle voyager, and may your spirit sail on silken skies until dawn's first light.